Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Hey, what's up, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. Ton of questions to answer, so let's just jump into it. First question comes from Joe Harrelson, who says, so who do you think is going to end up being right? The 32 teams that passed on Shador 143 times, or the analyst who said he should have been picked much earlier? There's a lot of ways. I don't love the framing of like how many times teams passed on him. Like, it's technically correct, but that's not really how the draft works. Some teams have a need for quarterback. Some teams don't have a need for quarterback. Like, I don't think we're going to look at this and be like, hey man, the Kansas City Chiefs passed on Shador Sanders. I think that would be a little bit ridiculous, right? But, you know, sometimes the way we talk about it kind of implies that all 32 teams were looking for a quarterback and decided to not take Shador Sanders. I think the biggest problem that Shador Sanders had was there just wasn't that many teams that were looking for quarterbacks this year. And this was predictable. I remember people ignoring me, or people telling me I was wrong when I was very right about this before the draft, where people were like, oh, we're going to get a crazy trade package because somebody's going to want to get a quarterback. Nobody wanted to get a quarterback in the top 10 other than the Tennessee Titans, who had the number 1 overall pick. Like, there wasn't that much of demand. And the reason it wasn't that much demand is just look at how many quarterbacks went last year. Look at how many teams have spent over $10 to $15 million on whatever quarterbacks are going to be on their roster this year. That all screamed to me that the market for quarterback was limited. So I think that had something to do with Shador's drop, right? All 32 teams weren't really looking for quarterbacks. You had like the Browns, the Giants, the Saints, and then maybe Pittsburgh. They didn't take a quarterback to the 6th round, so I wouldn't even feel comfortable adding them. With Seattle, they took a quarterback in the 3rd round. There were like 4 teams that legitimately wanted to go and get a quarterback, right? Everybody else waited until like the 5th, 6th, or 7th round to do anything about it. So that's a huge part of the reason, right? 32 teams didn't really pass on Shador. 4 teams passed on him a lot. And that's the question we have to ask ourselves, right? Do we think that those 4 teams were correct for whatever reason that they passed on Shador? Whether that reason being that they just didn't value the quarterback position in this year's class based on the talent coming out until a certain place in the draft, or whether that be because they legitimately did not think Shador Sanders had the talent to go in the 1st, 2nd round, or 3rd round, or 4th round. You know, that's the question that needs to be asked here, right? Now, as far as like answering what you said, who do I think will end up being right? I'm inclined to believe that Shador is going to prove that he's better than a 5th round pick at some point in his career. I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be in Cleveland, but Shador's tape in college demonstrates that he is talented enough. I don't know what the extent of the cold feet about him in the draft was about. But yeah, like if that stuff isn't really a big deal, then Shador will probably, you know, demonstrate that he is better than a 5th round pick. And better than a 5th round pick could be a long-term backup. It could be a starter. It could be a number of things. But yeah, I think, you know, there's not much Shador has to do to prove that he should have been picked earlier than 144. You know what I mean? All right. Next question comes from Quentin Gray, who says this. Let me flip this up. What would be a good rookie season for Mason Graham? This is going to be difficult because I don't think it's going to be very quantifiable, right? But if Mason Graham is playing well enough for, you know, people who really pay attention to notice, then I think that's a good rookie season, right? However that manifests itself is however it manifests itself. I think the tape will tell the story on Mason Graham. And that's just going to be how you can judge him, right? He plays a position that doesn't accumulate a ton of stats, right? So that's going to be difficult, but I'm pretty sure if he's playing well, there will be those who really like, the Brian Baldingers of the world, right? You can measure Mason Graham's play by the amount of Brian Baldinger Mason Graham posts you get on Twitter. Like that's the best metric for a defensive interior player who's not going to accumulate a ton of traditional stats. That's the best way to measure it, right? If Brian Baldinger is posting about Mason Graham on a regular basis, my man's going to be all pro, right? Like that's how I kind of that's a good baseline to go off of if you don't necessarily know what to look for in Mason Graham's tape to understand his impact. And I'll try to make sure if he's playing at a high level to highlight it, or if he's not playing at a high level to highlight what is absent from that tape during the season. So, I promise you, if Mason Graham's playing good, you're going to know because I'm going to be talking about it, right? Like you'll tell. But I don't know if there's like a stat I can give you that could tell you what Mason Graham, his production should look like, right? Because, you look at somebody like Haloti Ngata, he never really got over 3 sacks in the season. He was very, very effective for the Baltimore Ravens, right? So in this Jim Schwartz style defense, it might be pressures, it might be QB hits, it might be stops, right? We'll see what Mason's impact is going to be, but the tape is going to have to tell the story and do the heavy lifting on that. Big Bird says, what is currently this course championship to window with older players like David Njoku, Miles, and Denzel Ward? I know we need a quarterback first to do that, but I know they only can be key contributors for long. Also, if you think it'll be around the 5-year mark where the Browns move on from Ward and Njoku before then to get younger, as well as Miles maybe requesting a possible trade before then. Sorry for the long question. Love the channel. So, if Miles requests a trade, like I think the Browns have like 2 years to figure out this quarterback situation, right? Miles understood when he signed the deal, 2025, we were not going to solve the problem. So if the Browns enter the 2028 season or look like they're about to enter the 2028 season with no real plan at quarterback, right? Let's say they enter the 2028 season and who's going to be over the hill by that point? Like, let's say it's 2028 and we're still like we're signing Tua in free agency or something like that, right? Like over the hill Tua or a player of that caliber, right? A player of the Kirk Cousins, Joe Flacco caliber to be the quarterback. Then I think you legitimately have to worry about if you're going to be able to keep Miles at that point, because Miles might request a trade because you still haven't solved the quarterback issue, and Miles does want to be on a winner. So if you have a guy you drafted in the first round in 2026 or 2027, 2 classes that project to be pretty good at quarterback, then you will feel like your ability to keep Miles is not really going to be a concern. What is the Browns' championship window? I mean, look, if they can hit on a quarterback this year and have a championship window in 26 and 27, they can wait till 26 and get a quarterback that can maybe move the needle for them, and then 27 is going to be their championship window. I know you're trying to ask like, hey, regardless of this team's championship if they have a quarterback or not, what's this team's championship window with some of the older veterans they have? And just the answer to that is simple to me. They got to get a quarterback within the next 2 years in order to have any championship window with the guys that they're built around right now. If they get to 2028 with no real quarterback solution, then yeah, you're looking at shipping off David Njoku and letting Myles Garrett get traded and Denzel Ward trading him there too. Because then those guys would be like 32 years old, 33 years old, and no real future in sight for them to be successful in a Cleveland Browns uniform, given that we're still looking for the quarterback in 28. So that's why it's imperative that between 2025 and 2027, the Browns got to get somebody that gives them hope at quarterback, right? Like you can't just, you got to do something at some point, right? And I think that's when their time kind of ends, is after the 2027 draft. If you don't leave that draft with the quarterback, if you don't leave that's when you have to just blow everything up, right? And you'll probably blow everything up before you even get to that draft. Well, it depends. If you think there's a quarterback there that you have a really good chance to take, then you're probably not going to blow stuff up. But if you get to 2027, you're like, I don't want to take a quarterback in 27, you're just going to blow everything up. So that's kind of just what the reality is. Luke Evans says, do you think there's a chance Shador starts if he proves he's ready in training camp and in the preseason? So the preseason games aren't going to be super important for Shador Sanders. I think the Browns have 2 joint practices this year. That's going to be super important for Shador Sanders. Now, honestly, it's going to be very hard for him to get the starting job, because the Browns' plan right now is we're going to play really good defense. And then on offense, we're just going to take care of the football, because the Browns were one of the worst turnover teams in all of football last year. We're going to take care of the football. We're going to run the football a ton. That's clearly part of what the Browns are doing. If you look at where they've added players, it's to stop the run and to run the ball, right? The Browns want to run the ball this year. They're going to run the ball a ton. And I know Kevin gets a rap from some people for not wanting to run the ball, but Kevin has run the ball at very high rates throughout his coaching career, right? He's been like top 5 in rushing attempts over the last 5 years as far as like what he calls for the offense. Last year, they got away from the run game, but 1, the run game was trash, and 2, it was Ken Dorsey calling a lot of them games. So Kevin's going to run the ball a lot this year. That's going to happen. And when that's the game plan, I do wonder if they're going to be hesitant about putting a rookie out there, because what you're going to ask from your quarterback position is not to unlock some kind of upside. What you're going to ask from the quarterback position is, hey, hit the layups, hand the ball off, check into the right run fits, and just manage the game, right? That's part of the reason why they went after Dillon Gabriel, because Dillon Gabriel's best skill set isn't anything physical that he offers you. It's his ability to manage football games. Look at the guys on the roster. Kenny Pickett, his strength, ability to manage the game. Why it looks like they prefer Kenny Pickett to Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco turns the ball over. He can get you high-level plays every once in a while, but he doesn't manage the game as well, even though he's a veteran, so he'll manage the game fine enough. But Kenny Pickett, strong set, managing the game, right? Dillon Gabriel, strong set, managing the game. That's what they want from their quarterback. So I think unless Shador Sanders is so good in training camp and these joint practices that it's undeniable, then they're probably going to go with somebody who has more experience managing football games than Shador, maybe even Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco is such a veteran player, though, at this point, that I find it hard to believe they wouldn't trust him to manage a game, even though he does have a history of interceptions. But that's going to be the style of play that the Browns are going to want to do. And also, I would like to point this out. I don't think anything gets a quarterback bench faster under Kevin Stefanski than interceptions. He does not like interceptions, right? Like, nothing gets a quarterback bench faster. All that stuff Deshaun Watson was doing, they was willing to let it rock because he wasn't throwing interceptions, right? But Jameis Winston, none of that shit rocked at all with them because he threw a bunch of interceptions. They do not like interceptions. And I know that sounds obvious, right? But some teams are more tolerant of interceptions than others. The Cleveland Browns are not one of those teams that have any tolerance for interceptions. I think it's a little bit too much in the intolerant of interceptions conversation that Kevin tends to be on here. If I'm being perfectly honest, I think Kevin puts too much value in not throwing interceptions to the point to where he's willing to let it rock with Deshaun Watson because he's not throwing interceptions. But still, just something to keep your eye on. If you want to know what's going to get a quarterback benched under Kevin Stefanski, it's always going to be them interceptions. That has been the through line throughout all of this. You start throwing interceptions, he's going to bench you. That's what it is, right? If you don't throw interceptions, he's going to let that shit rock. You know, and I think that's why he probably looks at Kenny Pickett and thinks to himself, maybe I could do that, because Kenny doesn't throw a ton of interceptions. Doesn't throw a ton of touchdowns or for yards either, but like that might be something that Kevin is attracted to. Same thing with Dylan Gabriel, right? He's not going to throw a ton of interceptions. He's going to be super safe with the football. And you know, I think Kevin could stand to be less conservative when it comes to interceptions, but that's kind of how he is. All right. So next question comes from Damien, who says, is it possible we trade for a wide receiver if one of these quarterbacks are good? I think it's possible if they get the right deal across their table. I don't think they're going to say no to it if they feel like there's a lot of upside to what this team could be next year. Or if this team like gets to a position before the trade deadline that they are like in clear playoff contention, then yeah, I think they would. But outside of those scenarios, which I don't find to be very likely, they're probably not going to go for a wide receiver. Luke is back at it again with another question. Do you think Jerome Ford gets traded at some point? Sampson seems to be his replacement. Would it make sense to still have him on the roster as running back 3? I think it only makes sense to have Jerome Ford on the roster as a running back 3. Like, I've been on this hill for a while. Jerome Ford bothers you because you've been asking Jerome Ford to be something Jerome Ford is simply not. He is not a bell cow running back. He's not built like a bell cow running back. I would implore y'all, right? Wait till training camp starts. And if you go down to Berea, I want you to look at the running backs when Quincy Jenkins is standing next to Jerome Ford. And I want y'all to notice just how much bigger rookie Quincy Jenkins is than Jerome Ford. And I'm not trying to slight Jerome Ford, because this is something I noticed when he was doing running back drills a couple of years ago when I was at Browns camp with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And then I saw Jerome Ford. I'm like, oh, Jerome Ford's not an every down back. That's not what he's built for. He is thinner than most running backs. And that means to me he can't be a bell cow. He's probably not a number 2 running back. But what he could be is a really solid number 3 change of pace guy, right? I think the idea with the Cleveland Browns is we're going to batter you to death with Quincy Jenkins and Dylan Sampson. And then when you're tired, when you're worried about going up the middle stuff, we're going to sprinkle in some Jerome Ford to go on the edges and hit home runs, because Jerome Ford is a really good home run hitter as a running back. That's why fantasy football people love Jerome Ford, right? If you ever notice, there's a little bit of a fan base for him. It's the fantasy football people. They love Jerome Ford because he's a home run hitter. Now, if you were a Browns fan, you don't love Jerome Ford because he gets tackled behind the line of scrimmage more than any other running back in the NFL, which ends up being a problem when you're trying to win an actual football game, right? But that's why the fantasy football people love him. He's a home run hitter. And I think you should utilize that element of Jerome Ford's game, that he is a home run hitter, a pretty decent blocker when he has a good offensive line coach, and somebody who can receive out the backfield as well, right? Like, he's not one-dimensional, but what you need to use him as is a home run hitter, right? Like, he should be the dude doing the end arounds. He should be somebody who gets like maybe 7 to 8 carries a game, and like you're fine if 4 of those carries are behind the line of scrimmage, but he gets 40 yards with the other 4 carries, right? Like that's fine. But when Jerome Ford is carrying the ball 20 times and he gets behind the line of scrimmage 10, 11, 12 of those times, but he gets like positive yards 8 of those times, that really has a negative effect on the game. So Jerome Ford, you're not gonna love him when you put him at running back 1 or 2. But I think at running back 3, he makes a ton of sense for a lot of football teams, including the Cleveland Browns. It's about having your room get to the points where you're not leaning on him more than you have to. Brownsternot says, now knowing the Browns got Shador late in the draft, would you go back and take Hunter at 2, or is the Jacksonville haul just too good to pass up? I'm not a fan of not taking Hunter at 2. You know, I'm okay with Mason Graham and the trade that the Browns made. So it's not like I hate what the Browns did, but if it were up to me, I probably would just took Travis at 2. Like, I'm being real about it, right? So, you know, would I go back and take Hunter at 2? Yeah, because that's probably what I would have originally done if it were my decision. But I'm not really like upset about the whole 2 to 5 thing. Like, you know what I mean? So either way, I think it's fine. I don't think drafting Shador changes how much I want Travis Hunter or not. I think that's also a real thing. I wanted Travis Hunter regardless of getting Shador Sanders. I could care less if I got Shador Sanders. In the first round, at least. I thought Shador was a good target in the second round. Let me make that clear. But as far as like my will to draft Travis had nothing to do with Shador Sanders. So it changes nothing, right? I wanted Travis at 2 because I think Travis is a tremendous player. Getting Shador late is a bonus. That's awesome. Great. Fun story. People are going to talk about it a lot. But, you know, it's probably better for both that it worked out this way because, man, if Shador and Travis both got drafted here, what number would Shador be wearing, man? Like, somebody took 2. DeAndre Carter took 2 from him, which, to be fair to DeAndre Carter, DeAndre did wear 2 in college and high school. I looked it up. He wore 2. He wore 2. So it didn't come out of nowhere that he wanted that number. But he took the number, right? He's a vet, technically. Well, he's not technically a vet. He's a super vet. He's like 30. So he got the number. Shador wasn't going to get 12 off Travis. So what number exactly was Shador going to wear, man? Will we seeing this man out here at like 16? Like that'd have been just completely sauceless. So for the number math of it all, you know, it kind of worked out well for Shador, right? Because 12 actually looks good on him. I think 12 makes a ton of sense for Shador. You know, and I actually like 12 on Shador better than 2, but all jokes aside, right? I'm joking about all that shit. It would have been nice to get Shador and Hunter, but honestly, my will to get Hunter on the team had nothing to do with Shador. You know, I wanted Travis on the team even if I thought I wasn't going to get Shador. So, you know, changes really nothing. Luke says, hey, Q, should the Browns be worried about Deion and the media if Shador doesn't start right away? No. There's no expectation that Shador's going to start right away. Right. Maybe if Shador gets cut, the Browns should probably expect some backlash from Deion Sanders in that camp. But like, if he doesn't start right away, like the audacity, right? And look, I know a lot of Deion's career is about the audacity, but Deion Sanders is also a football coach who also understands the dynamic of like, hey, this guy had to walk onto my university because they had some other stuff going on with them. And I can't just treat them like they a 5-star, right? Like I might not start that guy. So this is something that Deion's going to understand. Like, and I need everybody to understand this too. Deion got a very time-consuming job at the University of Colorado. I don't think he's going to have a ton of time to comment on every single little detail of what's going on with Shador. Right? If there's something big that happens, obviously Deion is an involved parent. He will have an opinion. But for the most part, Deion got a job, man. Deion not just watching these games at home. I know people talk about Odell Beckham's dad. I don't know what Odell Beckham's dad does for a living, right? And I don't know if that man is busy 24/7. But all I can say is this. Deion's job is very, very time consuming. I don't know if that's the same for some of the other parents we have heard that have jumped off on social media about the way that they feel like their kids are being treated. I feel like Deion got less time on his hands than Odell's father, than Kareem Hunt's father. So I don't think this is something we really need to concern ourselves with in year one. And let's be real here, Deion's probably going to be extra careful given that part of the perception of why Shador fell to the 5th round was because people kind of pointed it back at him. So he's probably going to be careful with that. So I really wouldn't quiver in my boots about Deion being like upset because Shador doesn't start right away. He's probably going to answer every question about Shador with like a Bible verse and like vague optimism about Shador. Like, I'm gonna be real with you. That's the Deion Sanders playbook. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what we're going to get out of Deion. I don't think Deion going to be out here spicy at his Colorado press conferences talking about a team that has nothing to do with him when he's the head coach of another university's team. You know what I mean? Like, it isn't really something he can concern himself too heavily with and look serious. And he does care about looking serious at his current job. Retro Gaming says, how good of a season do you think it'd have to be for the rookies in order for Cleveland to pass on a quarterback next year? Purely hypothetical. We haven't seen the rookies play yet, but it's possible that we end up in a situation, unless they were positioned in the draft to get a generational talent, that we could be debating over if we should pass on someone like Drew Aller and double down on what we got instead. Yeah, I think a lot of this debate is going to depend on a couple of things, like you mentioned. How good are these quarterbacks coming out? That's the first thing, right? Because if there is a generational talent, and the Browns do, for whatever reason, have to pick to go get a generational talent at quarterback, they are going to draft that guy no matter what anybody's doing at quarterback this year. They're going to draft that guy. That's what they're going to do. If they think that Shador could be really good, if they think that Dylan Gabriel could be really good, but the dude they can get with the number 1 overall pick is going to be amazing, they're going to draft amazing. That's what they're going to do. And that's what they should do, by the way, right? Like, you had the Bengals had Andy Dalton when Joe Burrow came out. The Bengals did not go, oh, man, we got Andy Dalton. Let's not get Joe Burrow. That's not how that works, right? Look, even this happened to Peyton Manning. Andrew Luck comes out. We got Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning still had an MVP season left in him before he left the Indianapolis Colts. Understanding he was coming off of a neck surgery, but still wanted to play football. And they said, all right, man, we'll see how that goes. We gonna draft the young buck out of Stanford, right? That's how it's gonna happen. So if I'm being real with you, if that's the situation, the Browns will draft a quarterback and Shador can make the Pro Bowl and they still gonna draft that quarterback. It's gonna happen. I don't see a world where the Browns have a chance to trade to get a generational talent at quarterback. They have the pick and they trade out the pick. I don't see a world where that happens. If that does, they better be right about whatever they got at quarterback. Now, if the Browns play themselves and the Jaguars play themselves out the top 15, well, let's say they both play themselves out the top 10 at the very least, and the Browns have like a pick in the 20s and so do the Jaguars. Well, then it becomes a lot more interesting, right? Because now you're not just asking, do we draft the quarterback? You're asking if the quarterback that you're going to draft is going to have a higher ceiling than what you already have on the roster. You're also going to ask yourself, okay, if all we had to spend was 1 pick to get a guy that we thought was generational, it's a no-brainer. But if I had to spend 2 picks for a guy that might be better than what I have on the roster, is that worth it? I think if you judge how the Browns have operated, let's say that Shador plays really well, then they probably just say, hey, let's just roll with Shador this year. And then if we stink next year, 2027 draft still going to have quarterbacks, we can go for that draft. So if the Browns have options at quarterback, I think that's better, right? What I do not want for the Cleveland Browns is for them to feel desperate about the quarterback situation going into next year's draft, because that's where mistakes can happen, is when you're desperate at quarterback. So if the Browns have to have a little bit of a debate about what they're going to do at quarterback, that's good, because that means that you have options. If there is no debate and we're all sitting here like, hey, we got to do something, that's how you draft Jackson Dart, right? And no disrespect to Jackson Dart. Let me use a different example to Jackson Dart, because Jackson Dart could be good. I don't love him as a prospect, but he could be good. That's how you end up taking Paxton Lynch in the first round. That's how you end up drafting Brandon Whedon in the first round. That's how you end up drafting Johnny Manziel in the first round, when you're desperate and you just need to draft somebody. So you just take the somebody you think is good, right? Don't want the Browns to be in that situation. That is a recipe to fail. So if one of these guys can play to a level we're not desperate, I think that's the best case scenario, in my honest opinion. Darrell C says, is it possible Deshaun Watson needs to be told no to play well? He came to Cleveland with all the hype and was on the podcast talking about being a game changer. We hear reports that him not really learning Kevin's system. Then Flacco happened, showing that the system wasn't the issue. And Deshaun and the Browns went totally on from that. Give Deshaun all he wants. He fails miserably. Look, man, I'm going to be honest with you. The problem with Deshaun isn't because we didn't tell him no. It's because the brother's just not good no more. I don't think he got told no a ton in Houston. He still stunk. Like, he was still, like, really good in Houston, right? In Cleveland, maybe he got told no, maybe he didn't. He stunk because he couldn't play. Like, there's no other reason behind it. Deshaun Watson took 2 years off. He came back. He never shook off the rust. And then by the time that he came even close to shaking off the rust, he popped his shoulder. Then he popped his Achilles. Then he popped his Achilles again. There's no other explanation for it other than he's not very good anymore. And that just is what it is, right? He is a reclamation project that is even more severe than like Carson Wentz at this point. So I don't think that's the case. But thank you for asking the question. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.